myself. My name is Scott Belmore. I'm with Mosaic Campus Ministry here at the University of Alaska, and our heart is to love and to pour into the lives of students while they're here and to offer them opportunities just to have honest and authentic conversations about who Jesus is and the gospel. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to host events like this tonight for our university and for our community so that we can do the best that we can as far as making an impact here. So we're glad that you're here. Just to give you a couple of things, we have restrooms on both sides of the stages if you need those facilities. Also, if those are full at the moment, you can run down into the lobby area, and there's some more restrooms there that you can use at that time. I think that's all of the things that I need to do as far as introduction. I'm going to let Frank introduce himself because he will do a much better job than I will. So, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Turek.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening, Seawolves. I want to start back on September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. He's standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position next to him. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a big lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his teammates are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. It's a split decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying on the roof will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two Navy SEAL colleagues receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of them said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends. I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor. Posthumously, the president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. And Mansour's High School in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The Golden Trident, Steel's wear, dominates the 50-yard line. January of this year, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship named in honor of her son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself than to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anybody sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But many people in today's culture don't think the story's true. First of all, they think it's invented. It was written down by religious people. We know religious people have a tendency to make things up, to embellish things. So how can we trust it? Not only that, it's got miracles in it. It's got a resurrection. Have you ever seen a resurrection? I haven't. Hasn't science somehow disproven miracles? It's really hard to believe this story. Actually, I think it's quite easy to show that it's true. You only need to answer questions in the affirmative to show that Christianity is true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Pretty groovy music, isn't it? Yeah. That is actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights on DirecTV channel 378. So here we, I think, 5 p.m. It's channel 378 if you got DirecTV. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. You guys have Roku? Anyone have Roku in here? ROKU. Look for NRBTV for National Religious Broadcasters. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Anchorage right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, it's streamed on our website right there, crossexamine.org. It's also on our app, and we're on radio every Saturday morning. But that's podcasted, so you can anytime you want. It's on iTunes. It's also on our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine is against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. We're going to go through these questions, and then we're going to do Q&A. Actually, I don't think we're going to do Q&A. I think we're going to do all Q, no A. All right? So everyone gets to ask a question. It takes all the pressure off me. All right? No. But this is going to be our outline here tonight. And you might ask, well, why are these the 4 questions? Well, let's deal with the first question. Does truth exist? You hear people say there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth, all truth is relative. You've heard these claims, right? Well, if there's no truth, then Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, then atheism can't be true either, right? So we're going to deal with that question first. Second question, does God exist? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if there's no God. But I hope to show you tonight there really is a theistic God. What's a theistic God? That's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. We're going to look at 3 arguments for this being. These arguments are taught in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're not even going to refer to the Bible when we do point 2. You can know God exists without any sort of import from Scripture. The third question is, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. And a lot of people don't think miracles can occur. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting that. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the documents are reliable enough to let us know if one particular event occurred in the 1st century. And that event would be the resurrection of Jesus. Did he really rise from the dead? Because if he did, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if he didn't, game over, false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week. Because if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity's false, as even the Apostle Paul said. If he hasn't risen from the dead, your faith's in vain. It's an historical claim. Now, I know some of you are going, wait a minute, Frank, what about the Old Testament? You believe the Old Testament's true? Well, look, if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Why? Who's in the New Testament that could authenticate the Old Testament? Jesus, exactly. What are you, like 2? You're amazing. He just said Jesus. Of course, look, if you're ever in Sunday school, you don't know. But yes, excellent. If Jesus really is God, as the New Testament documents claim he is, That's a big if. But if he really is God, whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament is the Word of God. So if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Now, there's a lot of detail we're going to be leaving out here. So if you want to get more detail, you can get the book on the book table. We ran out of the DVD sets. There's also a new book out there called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. And that book points out that I've noticed that when atheists are arguing there is no God, quite frequently, they're stealing aspects of reality that would only exist if God existed in order to say he doesn't exist. And it would be a miracle if this thing actually... Text the word evidence to 44222. We'll send you the whole PowerPoint presentation in PDF format. We'll also send you some other free stuff. Now, if you do buy a book out there, I want to point out that all the proceeds from the books will go to feed needy children. Mine. So, you know, I got 3 sons, so I need some help. Actually, I was in the Navy for 8 years. And by the way, Navy stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. My sons were smarter than me. They wanted to go in the military, so they went into the Air Force. In fact, that's right. The oldest son is an intelligence officer. In fact, he's reading your email right now. And he just got engaged a couple of weeks ago to another intelligence officer. So their kids are going to be Einstein. The second son is a KC-10 pilot. You guys know what a KC-10 is? Oh, yeah. A KC-10 refuels other planes in flight. So there's a big plane that has boom coming out the back. And so other planes come up and get gas from them while they're flying. So what we say about our middle son, Spencer, is that every day he flies up to 30,000 feet, he sits around, and he passes gas. He gets paid for it. This is every man's dream. If I got to pay to pass gas, I'd be a multi-millionaire already. The third son is not in the military, but inside the house. That's right. So my wife and I are now empty nesters. Took us a while to get used to that. About 10 minutes. That's how long it took to change the locks. Anyway, are you guys ready? Yeah. All right, we're going to start right here at point 1, does truth exist? And whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? It was Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't handle the truth." See, Wolves, if he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. That's not how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try it again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't that feel good? Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, there is no truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about here tonight, whether you're an atheist or a Christian or anywhere in between, this is the most important thing we feel we're going to talk about. It's so important that half of what you need to know in order to know the truth, you'll know if you know this thinking skill. Why? Because half of the battle is just avoiding what's false. And this thinking skill will help you detect statements that are false. And the best way of showing you this thinking skill is to give you an illustration of using it. Suppose someone were to come up to you and say something like this: there is no truth.
You should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Is that true? Yeah, if somebody says there's no truth, you should say, hey, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. This is known as a self-defeating statement. What's a self-defeating statement? The self-defeating statement doesn't need its own standard. The self-defeating statement is like saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, what would you say? You just used English to say it, right? Or it's like saying my parents had no kids that day. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Somebody will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that. These are known as self-defeating statements. And once you get good at recognizing self-defeating statements, you're going to be halfway home. This one? Okay. All right, we're going with this one now. So this thing, it doesn't do anything. It's a prop. Okay? All right. So, here's the thinking skill. What you need to do is you need to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself, and you say, is that true? All right, let's do a few more of these. How about if somebody says all truth is relative? You turn the claim on itself, and you say, is that a relative truth? How about if somebody says there are no absolutes? Is that an absolute? Or you can say absolutely sure, right? Because it's an absolute. How about if somebody says you can't know anything? How do you know that you can't know? How about if somebody says it's true for you but not for me? Say, is that true for everybody? Is true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. How about if somebody says you should doubt everything? That's right. You should say, should I doubt that? I mean, why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice that? They think that's true. Now, let me ask you guys a question. I don't care whether you're a Christian, atheist, anywhere in between in here. Let me just ask you a question. How many people in here sometimes doubt that what you think about reality is true? In other words, you might be wrong. Hey, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I go, I don't even know if this is true. I've written books on this stuff, and sometimes I go, I don't know. But then I start thinking about it, and I realize that most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. In other words, the evidence for Christianity is really good, but if I'm having a bad day, I go, I don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. What's changing? Me or the evidence? Me, I'm going up and down. The evidence doesn't change. I'm changing. In fact, some people will email me, or I'll see them out on a college campus or something, and they'll say, you know, Frank, I used to be a Christian, but I'm an atheist now, and I lost my faith. And I don't mean to be unkind, but since I'm from New Jersey, sometimes I am. And I want to say, when they say I lost my faith, I want to say, so? So, you mean because your psychology changed? God has popped out of existence? Because your psychology has changed? Jesus didn't rise from the dead? Your psychology will not tell you whether something's true or not. The evidence will. Don't concentrate on your psychology. That's fickle. That goes up and down every day. The evidence will tell you whether something's true or not. And if you start looking at the evidence, I think you'll realize the evidence is very good that Christianity is true. And what you ought to do is you ought to start doubting your doubts, because if you start doubting your doubts, then you're back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? I doubt it. All right, we're going to see if this is just a prop or it really works. This is the great Clint Boland, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Say hello to Clint Boland. How about now? Is it working? Is it working?
Is it working now?
It's working. Thanks, Ryan. It's working. Roger. Oh, how about this? You hear this a lot. You ought not judge. Somebody says you ought not judge. What should you say? Turn the claim on itself. Is that a judgment? Right? They're judging you for judging. Now, you might say, Frank, wait a minute. Time out. You're a Christian. Jesus said don't judge. Nope. Never said it.
Never said don't judge. He didn't just stop right there. It's right there in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, Frank. Yeah, it's Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, but he didn't stop right there. In fact, I know it's going to sound a little strange, but there are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. You think when Matthew was writing the Gospel of Matthew, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No. The verses, the chapter and verse divisions were put in there about 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is a good thing because it's a big series of books. It's hard to figure out where you are sometimes, right? The problem is we tend to think that since it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. Jesus didn't stop right at judge not. What did he say? He said, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. You hypocrite. Now, is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get the problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Because it's a judgment itself, and number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments just getting over here tonight, right? Good choices from bad choices, safe choices from dangerous choices. Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. What judgments do atheists make? There's no God. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. There's no real meaning to life. It's all up to you. There's no objective meaning. There is no objective right and wrong. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, however. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? What was their job? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They helped run Israel politically because some of them were on the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council. They were the politicians. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and jacks people up in the temple. Jesus did this? Yes. And then in John chapter 8, he's talking to these Pharisees. He's having a bit of an argument with them, and he gets to the point in the conversation where he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you have an argument with somebody and you stop and you say, your father is the devil? Jesus did that. By the way, don't do that to a sibling of yours, okay? How about Matthew 23? He's talking to these same people. What does he say? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you brood of vipers, you snakes. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. He was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? I mean, look, he was kind most of the time, but he certainly didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter S. No, Jesus was tough. Don't buy into the wimpified version of Jesus. Read the Gospels for yourself. In fact, why was Jesus killed? You think he was killed for skipping around saying, love your neighbor? No. He was killed because, number one, he claimed to be God, which was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And number two, he spoke truth to power. The temple authorities did not want him to succeed, because if he succeeded, they thought they wouldn't. They literally see Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. And what does Caiaphas say after that, the high priest? It's better that one innocent man die than all of Israel go down. They had evidence he was the Messiah, and they didn't want to hear it. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. Do you ever notice when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, you know, I really love you. You're such a wonderful person. I wish I could be like you. You think your friend's going to go, who do you think you are? Are you judging me? Do you think you're worse than me? No, your friend's never going to say that, right? Why? Because I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset with you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. A few military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. As Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. Now, I could spend a lot more time talking about these self-defeating statements. We don't have it. I just want to get one point across just to summarize this whole thing up. Can everybody see that this claim right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? The same thing is true with there are no absolutes, all truth is relative, you ought not judge. All truth comes from science. That's another one. That truth doesn't come from science. You don't get all your truth from science. It's impossible to get all your truth from science. You need philosophical claims in order to even do science. In fact, the most important things in the world to you have nothing to do with science. Honey, do you love me? I don't know. Let's run an experiment. No! So, the point here is that truth does exist. But I gotta mention one thing here. If our reasoning is good to this point, what this means is that relativism and postmodernism are false. Why? Because they claim it's true that there's no truth. See that? Now, I do need to point out one thing here. I don't always do this right here, but I just want to mention one thing. You know, later on, well, it's already set up. We're going to have the microphone there for Q&A. And if you're an atheist here today, thank you for coming. I want to just give you a heads up if you're an atheist, because I may ask you a question. It's not fair for me to ask you a question unless I give you a warning that I'm going to ask this question. Here's the question I might ask you when you get up there. And the question is this. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No. Oh, wait, I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it reasonable that you wouldn't believe something if it were true? And the reason is because they don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God. They want to be God of their own lives, and they think God is going to get in the way of what they want to do. In fact, this infects all of us to a certain degree. Most of us, we're not on a truth quest, we're on a happiness quest, right? And we're just going to believe whatever we think is going to make us happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately destructive things. However, over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here who's over 40 knows what I'm talking about, because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? If you want to get true contentment and happiness, the only way to get it is to go straight through truth. And Jesus is the truth. So keep that in mind. I may ask you that question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Now let's move on to the second question. We're going to spend the majority of our time on this question. Does God exist? And I mentioned there are three arguments that we're going to look at briefly for these the arguments for God. The first is the argument called the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, then there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments have scientific evidence behind them. We'll see a little bit of that here in a few minutes. However, the third argument doesn't have any science behind it, yet it's the argument we've all known intuitively since we were very small children, and it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in the Holocaust, or it's wrong to crucify children like ISIS does, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against ISIS's opinion. Now, we know that those issues are not just a matter of opinion. They're really wrong. If they're really wrong, there must be a standard of rightness outside of ourselves, which is what we mean by God's nature. We'll look at that argument later. First, we have to look at the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming out here tonight just to see that little move like that. I mean, come on. Did you see the way God just floated right up there? We got to see that again, don't we? Look at this. Look at that. Now, this cosmological argument is the argument that many say points back to the... Now, I know there's some Christians in here who are saying, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was the most famous physicist in the world until he died a couple of years ago, put it this way. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data. What's the data? That space, time, and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing, out of non-being. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. Nothing. Not a quantum vacuum. Nothing. In fact, an agnostic astronomer by the name of Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist who was an agnostic, put it this way. He put it even stronger than Hawking did. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, and by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup. All right, a cosmologist is someone that studies the origin of the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, normally, scientists, they know science is tentative, but Vilenkin realizes that every line of evidence we have from not only science but also philosophy shows the universe had a beginning. That's why he's calling it a proof. And it's a problem. Why? Well, it's a problem because if all of nature had a beginning, then whatever created nature can't be from nature. It must be something beyond nature. In other words, if space, time, and matter had a beginning, whatever created space, time, and matter can't be made of space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because in order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. The being would also have to be intelligent in order to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, Frank, how do you know it's the Christian God? We don't yet. We haven't done enough research. This could be Allah or some other theistic God. All we're saying is it could be the Christian God. But I think if we keep going through the evidence, we're going to realize that the same man that walked out of the tomb 1,986 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. But we haven't gotten there yet. Now, we're not going to look at the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number three, it's not controversial. Even the atheists are admitting it. I just want to jump to the bottom line. Here's the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, it seems it must have had a beginner. We got two options here. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone. Well, I was at Texas A&M, must be 10 years ago, and I put the slide up, and an atheist said, Oh, I think number 1 is more reasonable. I said, hold on, let's look at number 2 first. Number 2 says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number 1 is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, if the whole universe could pop into existence out of nothing by nothing, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? You wake up one morning, your Hyundai is a Tesla. How do I charge this thing? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Could have saved me like $4,000 if I was just a little bit more patient. If you're hungry after this thing and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your kitchen, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? No! By the way, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Atheists believe in a miracle. What's the miracle? That no one created something out of nothing. Christians believe that someone created something out of nothing. You go, well, who created the someone? Well, no one created the someone. Why? Because there has to be an uncaused first cause. Look, it's either the universe or something outside the universe. All the evidence shows the universe had a beginning. So the something outside the universe must be spaceless, timeless. Hey, if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No. God is what we call the uncaused first cause. In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? The universe hasn't always been here. It had a beginning. Now, we could spend more time on that. We don't have it. We got to go to the next argument, the teleological argument. Look, God floated down to the teleological argument right there. And there's 2 aspects to this. Not only is the universe designed, but so are you. But we're going to look at the universe first. And what's been discovered in recent decades is that the universe is fine-tuned for life. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe virtually imperceptibly, there would be no universe, or there would be no universe that could support life. And even atheists admit this. Stephen Hawking again, here's what he said. If the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. In other words, if the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different from the very beginning, we wouldn't be here. Now, you can't make any evolutionary argument for this. Why? Because the expansion rate did not evolve to any particular point. The expansion rate started there. This is one of the initial conditions of the universe. It seems to me the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being that made the expansion rate precisely what it needed to be for us to exist here right now. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. So let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. You can't get that tape measure at Home Depot, okay? Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches. This is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If the strength of gravity were different by 1 inch in either direction across a scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. I don't have enough faith to believe that that value just landed there by chance. And oh, by the way, when scientists use the word chance, what does that mean? I mean, is chance a cause? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. In fact, when scientists use the word chance, we don't know. Look, there's only 2 possible reasons for that value being where it is. It was designed or it wasn't. What's more reasonable? Seems like it was designed. And by the way, it's not just the universe that appears to be designed. Our solar system appears to be designed. Before I get to that, I want to point out that these are just 2 of several of these factors, and if you were to change any one of them an imperceptible amount, we wouldn't be here. Now let's take a look at our solar system. This is the solar system right here, right? Where are we? Third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to, or a little bit further away from the sun, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is... That's a lie. It's too cold here in the winter. And the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit right here, Saturn, same thing, by the way, but if Jupiter wasn't where it is right now in that size, we couldn't exist right here. Why not? What does Jupiter do for us? It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. In fact, if we take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these purple marks are right here? Those purple marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, you want to see the planet sizes? Check this out. Here's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here, right of the white star Regal. That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here would be 5 or... Look, I don't name the stars, all right? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And this is in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. All that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, how far is 30 trillion miles? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our sons out to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get down to Tucson, they have this museum. It's over the hill from the city, so it blocks a lot of the city lights. And on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there this one night, and the guide goes, wow, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on. We're not going to see this space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky, about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking across the western sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it. When it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be there. Think about how fast, 5 miles a second. Well, I did a little calculation. Tried to figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy an average distance away 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy an average distance away, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. You know how long it takes to get to the next nearest star if we could go light speed, 186,000 miles per second? It would take us almost 4 years just to go to the next nearest star. And how many stars are out there? The number of stars that are out there are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. You see this picture right here? This is from the ground. See that little square right there? That's that square from the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are stars, galaxies. February 1st, 2003, President George W. Bush went into the East Room of the White House. It was a Saturday afternoon. They turned the TV camera on. Every major network, including international networks, carried his address. Saturday afternoon? Why? The president looked in the camera and said, "My fellow Americans, this morning our country experienced a great tragedy. Upon re-entry into the atmosphere, the space shuttle Columbia burned up in the skies over Texas. There are no survivors. The Columbia is lost." The president a quote from Isaiah chapter 40. Why Isaiah chapter 40? Because in Isaiah chapter 40, God is speaking. And what does God say? "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One." In other words, you want a comparison? You want to know what I'm like? Here's what God says. "Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and named them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." The president then looked back in the camera and said, "The same God that created and named all those stars is the same God that created and knows the names of the 7 astronauts who perished today. While they did not return safely home to us, we can all now pray they've all returned safely home." You want to know who God is? Most of us have the wrong idea of who God is. We think God is a big angel. No, you want to know who God is? Look to the heavens. What do you see when you look to the heavens? You see a virtual infinite expanse. Psalm 103 verse 11 says, "God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth." How high are the heavens above the earth? Stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. Over 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. Infinite. That's the point. In fact, if you really want to know who God is, meditate on the attributes of God. He's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, loving, just. Meditate on those attributes, then remove all limits from your mind. That's God. Now, as amazing as the heavens are, you are actually more amazing. Why? Because the heavens aren't made in the image of God, but you are. Now, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? It doesn't mean you look like God, because God is an immaterial being. It means you're a person like God, that you have mind, emotion, and will, that you know, you feel, you want, and you can create. We're the only creatures that we know about that have those capabilities to know, to feel emotion, to want, and to also create. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father. And then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. That's right. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter genome that makes you you. All the letters are in the right order. Your DNA, all in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.2 billion letter genome that makes you you. All the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. Do you know you have not received any more genetic information from this point until right now? In fact, your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, time out. You can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, friends. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law which doesn't legislate morality. The only question is whose morality will be legislated. And when people say, don't impose your morality on me, I go, why not? Would that be immoral? See, because that's what you're doing right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, but you're imposing an ought not on me right now. Actually, the better answer is this. When people say, don't impose your morality on me, I go, this is not my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles do not have the law of the law written on their hearts. Look, so if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. I'm not the moral arbiter of the universe. You have a problem with the Creator on whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. Are you thinking about this? Are you going, time out, Frank? I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? You know, Aristotle recognized something 2,400 years ago. He noticed that all of nature is going in a direction. For example, why do acorns, if they're properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't an acorn become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it does not have a mind of its own, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s and said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God, that all of nature is going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be a director. There must be a mind. Now, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this argument for God is not an argument like a Big Bang argument way back then. What Aquinas and Aristotle are saying is that this requires a cause every single second, because the natural laws that are directing this universe are consistent and precise, and they're going in a direction. So there must be a director behind it. You ever wonder, why can we do science so reliably? Because we live in an orderly universe where things go in a direction. Well, there must be a director then. That director is what we mean by God. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music's over. Same thing is true with God. God creates the universe, He creates you, and He sustains the universe and sustains you every single second. If He were to pull His hand away, we'd go out of existence. This is why the Apostle Paul said, in Him we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says that God sustains all things by His powerful word. He doesn't just create, but He sustains every single second. Now, there's more in the book, Stealing from God, on that. We don't have time to go into it right now. We got to get to our third argument for God, and that is the moral argument. And this argument may be the most relevant to people today. Why? You can ignore the beginning. You can ignore design. It's real hard to ignore morality because you deal with it every day. Let's imagine that we go out on a hike somewhere, and you can hike through Alaska, as you know, and get lost quite easily. Now, suppose you go out there and you get lost. Your cell phone dies. You know the direction from which you came, but you can't figure out that direction. All you have to help you find that direction is a magnetic compass. And you know a magnetic compass is supposed to point to magnetic north. If you can find out where north is, you can figure out the direction you came from and you can get home. But you take out your compass, and instead of your compass pointing to magnetic north, your compass, no matter which way you turn, always points to you. How helpful would that compass be? You know where you are. You're trying to figure out helpful at all. Well, question. Why do we think that if the compass of life doesn't always point to us, in other words, if things aren't going just the way we want them to go, that God doesn't exist, He's evil, or He's forgotten about us? Do you realize that whether or not God exists, you are not the center of the universe? And neither am I? But we act like we are, don't we? And by the way, is there a moral compass to life? Is there a right way to live life? Or can you just live life any way you want? In other words, do we discover right and wrong, or do we determine right and wrong? What do you think? This is the interactive portion of the program. We discover, but no, our culture says, oh, no. You determine what's right for you. I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota about 3 years ago doing this seminar over several evenings, actually. We're going into a lot more depth. And we had the microphone set up for Q&A. And the first night I was there, we had a couple of young men in their 20s get up to the microphone, and they were atheists. I didn't think anything of it, even though we were in a church. Atheists would come and ask questions. We had a good exchange. Anyway, the next night I was there, about a 50-year-old man got up to the microphone, and he had a question written on 2 sheets of paper. And he began to read the question. 10 seconds into reading the question, he broke down crying. He couldn't go any further. So I walked off the platform, I went down to him, and he handed me the 2 sheets of paper, and all he said was, "Read it, read it." So I began to read it to myself as I'm walking back up to the platform. I'm trying to digest this 2-page question. By the time I got back up to the platform, I realized that man, whose name turned out to be Steve, was upset for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, Steve had recently learned that a supposed friend of his, a man by the name of Tom, who was also about a 50-year-old man, adults, had been abusing Steve's daughter from the time she was age 4 to the time she was age 14, right in his own home, under his nose, never saw it. The second reason Steve was upset was because the 2 young men who were there the night before, who were the atheists, were his sons, who used to be Christians and are now atheists because they said, if there is a good God, he wouldn't have allowed this to happen to my sister. In fact, one of them was going to a seminary to become a priest. As soon as he heard the news, he said, "That's it, I'm done with God. There is no God. A good God wouldn't have allowed this to happen to our sister." So I said, "Steve, it's okay to be mad at God. In fact, some of the Bible writers are mad at God. Read some of the Psalms. Read Habakkuk. God, where are you?" It's okay to be mad at God. God can take it. By the way, do you realize that you could curse God all day? You're not going to hurt him. He's an infinite being. You can praise God all day. You're not going to help him. He's an infinite being. Who gets all the benefit of praise and the detriment of cursing? We do. That's why he wants us to worship him, not for his benefit, but for ours. So I said, "Steve, it's okay to be mad at God, but this is not a good long-term strategy. However, this is not an argument against God. It's actually an argument for God." And I said, "When the right time comes, Steve, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, what that 50-year-old man did to your sister wasn't really wrong. It's just your opinion. Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, everything's just a matter of opinion." In fact, you say, "Well, how can this really show that God does exist?" Well, C.S. Lewis was an atheist early on in his life. He went through World War I, a terrible war, and he said there can't be a good God because there's too much injustice in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany, and he realized that his reasoning was poor. And here's what he said. "As an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of us just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. So if you're going to say something's wrong, you're implying there's something right. But for something to be right, God must exist, because what we mean by righteousness is God's nature. Evil can't exist on its own. Evil is only a lack in a good thing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. If you take all the car out of the rust, what do you got? Nothing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a body, you got a better body. If you take all the body out of the cancer, what do you got? Nothing. Evil doesn't exist on its own. You could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have good without evil. You can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, then God exists. And by the way, if there is no God, if everyone gets to determine their own compass, you can't say that Tom, the pedophile, had the wrong compass, because there is no right compass if there is no God. Yet everybody knows that what he did was wrong. If what he did was wrong, there must be something known as right, and that's God's nature. Now, everybody in Sioux Falls, South Dakota knows that this guy's guilty, but he's not in jail. Why? Because every time the trial comes up, Jessica, the one who was abused, psychologically checks out. She can't testify against him. Why? She wanted to marry him. She didn't know. If she doesn't testify, he doesn't go to jail. So I said, Steve, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, then the man who did this to your sister will never get justice. Why? He's not going to get justice here on earth if she doesn't testify. He's not going to get justice in the afterlife if atheism's true, because there is no afterlife. Do you really think that's the way the universe is? Do you really think there's no such thing as justice? The very reason you're upset, rightfully so, is because you know a great injustice has been done. But there can't be injustice unless there's... This is why God must exist, for justice to exist. Because you would need a being like God, an all-knowing, all-powerful being, to right wrongs for justice to occur. If he doesn't exist, justice will never be done in many cases. Now, Jessica, the one who was abused, once she hit 18, decided to do something positive with this awful experience. She actually wrote a book. Here it is, Not Your Princess by Jessica Mitchell. I read one chapter of this book. I couldn't read it anymore. You can get this on Amazon right now. Now, why am I telling you this? Because her father, Steve, wants people to know that this happens in American households far too much. In fact, if a young person ever comes to you and says, Uncle Joe did this to me, do not dismiss it. Oh, Uncle Joe would never do that. How do you know? You think the kid's making it up? Jessica's now getting emails and phone calls from young people who have nowhere to turn. Their parents don't even believe them. Sometimes the parents are the culprits. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is the abuse of children like this evil? At least two of you are saying yes. Is it evil? Then God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Now you can ask the question, why would God allow it to continue? That's a question we deal with in the book Stealing from God. But what you can't say is he doesn't exist, because it wouldn't even be evil unless there was good, and it wouldn't be good unless God existed. Now, the last I checked with her father, Jessica, despite being in her early 20s now, is still in a treatment program in San Diego, California, $15,000 per month. She has multiple personalities, which is common with this kind of abuse. You know, our culture tells us that sex is just physical. That's a lie. If sex is just physical, why is Jessica still in a treatment program at $15,000 a month? If sex is just physical, why is it if somebody rapes you, it's worse than if somebody just physically assaults you? If sex is just physical, why is it if your spouse decides to have a physical relationship with someone else, you don't go, oh, that's just physical? Because it's a lot more than physical. It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's psychological, it's moral. You have sex with someone, everything is forever. Sex is like fire. You put it in your fireplace, it's wonderful, it'll warm you. You get it anywhere else in your house, it will burn your house down. Maybe not immediately, but over the long term it will. And most of us in here over 40 know what I'm talking about. It's one of the most beautiful things in the universe. It's also one of the most destructive things in the universe. You want to destroy somebody, treat them like a sex object. So the bottom line is God's nature is morality's true north. If there is no God, nothing's ultimately right or wrong. Now, what can we conclude from the three arguments we've been through? Cosmological, teleological, and moral. I think we can show there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. Now, who could that be? It could be the God of the Bible, but how do we know it's the God of the Bible? For that, we got to go to the third question. Are miracles possible? And this won't take long. This is the shortest of the four. Now, admit one thing. First of all, miracles can be used by God to tell us who speaks for him. In fact, that's what the Bible seems to indicate. That the sign is confirmed, or the sermon is confirmed by the sign. That the message is confirmed by the miracle. The problem is there's a lot of what we would call crazy miracles in the Bible. In fact, some people believe miracles are impossible, like Noah. All right, Chris, this is just for Christians in here. Christians, don't let this get out of the room. Can we all agree amongst ourselves that the Noah story is crazy? Thank you. And a resurrection. Everyone I know who's dead is still dead. Has anyone in here seen a resurrection? No. So why would you believe in a resurrection? Yet our entire faith is based on believing in something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Well, let me ask you guys this. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. Yes, the greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, here's the interesting thing. We now have atheists admitting the data for the first verse. Well, if the first verse actually did occur, is it possible these other miracles occurred? Yeah, if God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do the Noah miracle? Of course he can. Of course it's crazy, unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't occur, unless God exists. Of course Jonah is silly, unless God exists. Now, I got to say a couple things about miracles before we move on, and that is, a lot of people don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That is not a good reason to disbelieve in something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic and the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? Nope. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? No, you may have seen justice done, but justice is a material thing. Now, I've debated a number of atheists. One of them was Christopher Hitchens. You guys know who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And we asked him, some student during our second debate asked Christopher, what is love? I mean, you believe in love, but you've never seen it. I mean, you've seen it done, but you haven't seen love because it's not a physical thing. So this student asked Hitchens, what is love? And finally, Hitchens said, love is a chemical, because he's a materialist. He has to say that. So I said, well, don't tell that to your wife. Like, honey, why do you love me? I got the chemical. Today. Maybe tomorrow I might not have it. But no, you believe in love, and it's not something you see. It's an immaterial reality. It's a value. It's in God's nature. You believe in gravity. You've never seen it. Frank, no, I got you on that one. There's gravity right there. Nope, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. And by the way, that's how we know God exists. We see him by his effects. We don't see him directly. We see a creation. That's the effect. We reason back to the cause, the creator. We have a moral law written on our hearts. That's the effect. We reason back to the moral law giver. We see design in the universe. That's the effect. We reason back to the designer. You've never seen George Washington, yet you believe in him. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by the cause George Washington. And this is what scientists do. They reason from effect to cause. What is the greatest of all sciences? This is going to sound crazy in this culture. The greatest of all sciences is theology. Why? Because you're taking every area of truth and putting them under one umbrella, God's truth. Every aspect of reality is something that you can see God in his effects. That's what theology is all about. Trying to reason back to God. Who is God? So there's a lot of things that you believe in that you've never seen. And by the way, if miracles do occur or have occurred, you shouldn't expect to see many of them, if any. Why? Because miracles, by definition, have to be rare events. If they were regular events, they wouldn't get our attention. We'd say, hey, this stuff happens all the time. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead for your sins. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get our attention. By the way, there does not need to be any miracles since Jesus and the apostles for Christianity to be true. You don't need modern-day miracles for Christianity. Now, I believe modern-day miracles do occur. In fact, my friend Craig Keener, who teaches at Asbury University, or Asbury Seminary, I should say, has written a hernia-inducing 2-volume set called Miracles that have to do with modern-day miracles. But they're not necessary to show that Christianity is true. So look, if the first verse is true, are these other verses possible? Yes. So now we only need to answer one more question. Is the New Testament true regarding the resurrection? Not everything in the New Testament has to be true for Christianity to be true, but is it true regarding the resurrection? And for that, I want to show you 8 lines of evidence that the New Testament writers are telling the truth. We don't have time to go through all 8 of them. I'm just going to list them. We're not going to spend a lot of time commenting on them, except 2 of them I'll spend a little bit of time on. These all begin with the letter E. Help you remember them. First of all, we have early sources. The New Testament is written early. Secondly, we have eyewitness details throughout the text. Only eyewitnesses could know much of what's in the text. Thirdly, we have embarrassing stories. I'll explain what that means. And number 4, excruciating deaths here in just a minute. Number 5, we have embedded confirmation. I can't really describe this to you right now. I don't have time. But this is probably the best evidence you've never heard of that the New Testament writers are all independently witnessing the same historical events. And the easiest way to show you what this is for you to Google when you get home 2 words. Here are the words. Undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences. Google that. There's a lot written on it. Undesigned coincidences. When you see how these New Testament writings are embedded together, you'll realize that these people are independently witnessing the same historical events. We also have expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. If I only had one Old Testament prophecy to make my case on, it would be Isaiah chapter 53. We have extra biblical writers. These are non-Christian writers within 150 years of when Jesus lived. There's about 10 of them. They're people like household names. Josephus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon, these kinds of people, right? And they briefly mention Jesus and the apostles, and when you add up their brief references, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. And then the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem. This is very hard to explain how Christianity could erupt out of Judaism in the city of Jerusalem based on an empirical claim that Jesus had risen from the dead. Why? Because who could have stopped Christianity by going to the tomb and taking the body out? The Jews and the Romans, and both of them wanted Christianity to go away. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't go take out his body because he was still using it. His tomb was empty. All right, now, as I say, we don't have time to go through all these. Let's spend just a little bit of time on point number 3, embarrassing stories. And there's a principle that historians use when they're trying to discover if a particular writer is telling the truth. It goes like this. If there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why do you think it would be true? Because you're not going to invent details about yourself that are embarrassing. You might invent details that make you look good, right? But you're not going to invent details that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys the question this way. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't lie to make yourself, unless you're a pool shark. You a pool shark? You might do that briefly, right? You don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good. And what we find in the New Testament documents is the New Testament writers have filled the text with embarrassing details that make themselves look bad. That's why we call this the duh factor. They're not making this up. In fact, let me just give you a few of these. Peter, the leader of these new disciples, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? You think Marco wrote that down at one point and said, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. That's embarrassing. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He winds up denying him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. That's right. I am woman. Hear me roar. Didn't run away like you sissy pants men did. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man here invent that? No, if I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write down this. I'd say, let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. That sounds pretty good. What do you think? Yep. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants. Why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in culture? Forget about the fact it's embarrassing to men, it is, but independently, why would you never say that? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. They had no motive to make this up. It made them look bad, and it didn't help their case. In fact, one of the women was demon-possessed. Mary Magdalene, formerly, they're not making this up. I actually had a lady come up to me once, and she said, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. And I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the Bible. It's really hard for me to believe this is in there. But at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is giving his disciples the Great Commission, go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers, right? There's a difference. He says make disciples of all nations. And as he's giving them the Great Commission, it says right there in the text that some of his disciples believed, but some doubted. Some doubted. He's standing right in front of them, resurrected. And they're going, you see that guy over there? Yep. That guy over there is Jesus. No, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. It can't be. The Romans killed him. He's dead. That's Jesus. Look, they crucified him. A spear went in his side. Blood and water come out. Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. Notice in Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus' family came to seize him and take him home because they thought he was out of his mind. That's embarrassing. You may have heard the scholars say the New Testament writers embellished Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there? which is universally recognized to be the earliest gospel, that they thought he was out of his mind. Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they made this up? He has his face wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. The Messiah's bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think the Bible writers got together when they were putting the genealogies together and said, you know what, I really think we should spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit? Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say? Rahab, Tamar? No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline of the Messiah. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. Go read about him. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us, huh? Bathsheba's in there. In fact, one of the writers won't even mention her name. When he gets to her in the genealogy, what does he say? Uriah's wife. Ooh. That's a slam. I mean, he's telling the truth. Who was Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. But they're telling the truth. If you look at the genealogy of the Messiah, there's 5 women mentioned in the Jewish Messiah's bloodline, and only one of them's a Jew. Rahab's not a Jew. Tamar's not a Jew. Ruth is not a Jew. Bathsheba's not a Jew. Who's the only Jew? Mary! Mary's the only Jew. History of the Jews. One Jew. You think they're making this up? No, they're just telling the truth, as embarrassing as it is. Now, there's a lot more in the books on embarrassing testimony. This alone doesn't prove the New Testament's telling the truth, but when you put all this together with the other things, you realize that they're not inventing this. And perhaps one of the most compelling reasons to believe they're not inventing it is they died excruciating deaths. These people who were in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by simply saying it never happened. In fact, here's a painting of Peter being crucified upside down. Now, you might ask yourself, as you're thinking about this, who wrote the New Testament documents down? You know who wrote them down? Jews from the first century. These are people that believed that Yahweh was God and believed they were God's chosen people, and they had a relationship with Yahweh for at least 2,000 years. All of the New Testament writers, with the exception of Luke, were all Yahweh-believing Jews. Question, why would they invent a resurrected Jesus? In fact, you could ask this question: what motive did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did these Jewish writers get by saying Jesus had risen from the dead? They got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? Well, first we get kicked out of the synagogue, and then we get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. Sometimes I get the question, if you're a Christian, you might get it too. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, they are. I briefly mentioned them earlier. And they're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know what that question kind of assumes underneath it? You really can't trust the New Testament writers because they're religious people. As I mentioned earlier, these people can embellish things, right? You really got to look at the secular writers to figure out what really happened. If you think about that for more than 10 seconds, you'll realize what a silly claim that is. Why? What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making this up? They're Jews. They had everything to lose by making it up. In fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective. He's been on Dateline 5 times, more than any other detective in America, solving cases, murders that are decades old. And he took his expertise in solving murders decades old and applied that expertise to the greatest murder of all time, the homicide of Jesus. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. And he said whenever he finds a murdered body, he knows that that guy is dead for one of 3 reasons, or a combination of these 3. Not 1,000 reasons. There's only 3 reasons that guy's dead. Sex, money, or power. There's a sex issue, a relationship issue, a money issue, or a power issue. That's why people commit crimes. That's why we sin. We want to get those good things, sex, money, and power, but sometimes we want to take shortcuts to get them. Now, did the New Testament writers get any of these things for saying Jesus had risen from the dead? Did they get chicks for saying Jesus had risen from the dead? No. Did they get money for saying Jesus had risen from the dead? No. Did they get power for saying Jesus had risen from the dead? No. In fact, Paul was in a position of power as a Pharisee before he became a Christian. He was killing Christians. And then he didn't get power. He had persecution as a follower of Jesus. He was persecuted. So he didn't get sex, money, or power. None of them did. In other words, they had no motive to make this up. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank, time out. We know some religious people will die for their faith. Some Muslims will do so. Some other believers will do so. Does that prove that their religion's true? No. Why? Because there's a big difference between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. There's a number of differences, but here's the main difference for our purposes. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything miraculous. They just have faith that Islam is true. But the New Testament martyrs witnessed Jesus rise from the dead. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. You see, many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, I got to point this one thing out. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. Now, how do we know that? Because, again, they're Jews. Why would they invent this? In fact, what I'm about to say, for those of you that believe the Bible's inerrant like I do, is going to sound like heresy, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. How can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Do you realize that? Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Yes, in fact, that's why he wrote the book of Romans, because he witnessed the resurrected Christ. Was John a Christian before he wrote the Gospel of John? Yes. Why? Because he witnessed the resurrected Christ. Was Matthew a Christian? You get the idea. In other words, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. There would be no New Testament if it wasn't for the resurrection. Why would Jews invent this in the first century? They wouldn't. They're telling the truth. And if they're telling the truth, then Christianity is true. Now, you can go a lot further by getting into this kinds of evidence. We don't have time to, but let's sum up the whole thing. Does truth exist? The answer is, if somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? We went through three arguments, cosmological, teleological, and moral. When you put those arguments together, you get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things, and you don't need the Bible to know that. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Creation, Genesis 1:1. Even the atheists are admitting the data for Genesis 1:1. And is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Sure seems to be. If it is, Christianity's true. So, if you want to go further, there are no more DVDs there, but the books are there. You can go to our website and get the DVD set. It's 12 parts, goes 7 hours. There's workbooks, curriculum that comes with it. Text the word evidence to 44222 if you want this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. Also, we're now teaching online courses. I teach some of them. Other instructors like Gary Habermas, the top guy in the world on the resurrection, teaches courses for us. Dan Wallace at Dallas Theological Seminary teaches courses for us. You can take these courses online. Just go to crossexamine.org. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're on YouTube Facebook, and our website right now. Hi, everyone, because we're streaming this. If you want to see these events, we stream them wherever we go, so you can. And if you like our YouTube channel and sign up for it, we'll give you one video a week that you can share with other people. These are short Q&A videos from the college campuses, so you can do that. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it YouTwitface. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Have you guys signed up for YouTwitface yet? We're on radio Saturday, DirecTV Wednesday night, and if you don't do anything else, download the Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. Download it. So, last thing before we get to your questions, it's true. So what? Well, so what? You know what this means? It means that someone actually did die for you. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. I was in the Navy, as I said, for 8 years, and I was in naval aviation. And in aviation, you try and earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's few things more difficult to earn than golden tridents. That's what the SEALs earn. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. What, 5, 10, maybe 15%? Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It's literally their professional identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in California, Rosecrans Cemetery just outside of San Diego, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in their Savior, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to take our identity and put our identity in our Savior. Our culture says, no, don't do that. Put your identity in your political party. Or put your identity in your ethnic group. Or put your identity in your race. By the way, there's only one race, the human race. Put your identity in your sexual orientation. Or put your identity in your spouse, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or your bank account, or your vocation, or your school. None of those things are ultimate, ladies and gentlemen. You were meant to put your identity in your Savior. Earlier this year, I was in Ohio at a college, and the organizers also do ministry in a prison. And they said, hey, after the college, the next day, would you go speak in the prison? I said, yeah, sure. So I went to this prison, went through all the security, got inside, and the chaplain met us and said, we know we wanted you to speak to 2 groups of people, but now we'd like you to speak to a 3rd group. Would you do it? I said, yeah, sure. Who is it? And they said, the guy's in solitary confinement. Sure, bring him up. Now, in prison, solitary confinement is known as the hole. So they brought like 20 to 30 of these guys up out of the hole, and they were dressed in orange, neon orange jumpsuits that I'm convinced you could see from space. If these guys got out of that yard, you would see them by a satellite based on their jumpsuits. And they were tatted up completely. They had tattoos on their faces. Think MS-13. That's who these guys were. So here I am in a room with all these guys, and I go through the evidence. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist with them. And at the end of the presentation, I could tell a lot of them are paying attention. Some are zoned out on drugs. They still get drugs in prison. But I noticed there was a couple of guys, especially in the back, who were paying special attention. And when I got to the end, one guy in the back went, "Hey, man! Makes sense!" I said, "Look, I don't know why you're here. Actually, I know why they're there. Some of them said I'm in for murder. That's why most of them were there. I said, I don't know why you're here, but do you realize that you can have the same identity that people on the outside have? Because in Christianity, you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. It's not like you do all these great things, and God says, wow, what a great guy, what a great gal. I got to accept this one. No, he already accepts you. You don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. This is why the eyewitness John, who witnessed Jesus' ministry and saw him rise from the dead, wrote in the biography he wrote, we call the Gospel of John, in the 12th verse of the first chapter, he gives you the right to become a child of God. And then what do? You just accept what he's done. And so you not only are forgiven for what you've done, you're given his righteousness. Think about how amazing that is. You're not only forgiven for what you've done, but you're given his righteousness. And he didn't just take the punishment on himself, he also rose from the dead to show us that he is God and his message is true. Have you ever accepted that message? If you haven't, why wouldn't you? It's free. You say, I don't want to change my life. Well, you don't have to change your life. You just accept him, and then he'll help you change it. But you don't get to God by being good. You get to God by accepting the gift he's provided. And then if you truly do love him, then you'll want to follow his commands. So, with that being said, we're going to go to questions. And before we do, Scott, the Mosaic group meets when and where? Can you tell us?
Yes, sir. We meet Tuesday nights in the Student Union Den at 7 p.m.
Tuesday nights in the Student Union Den at 7 p.m. And the reason I'm telling you that is because Scott and his group Mosaic put this on, so give him a hand for hosting this. And so if you're a student here, we don't want this just to be an event. We want this to provide a vehicle for you to know more about God, know more about Jesus, know more about one another. And so you can go to Scott's group at that time, Tuesday night at 7 in the den. Okay, so write that down. All right. Now, Clint here is going to adjust some microphones because this is going to be broadcast over the internet. So if you want to ask a question, just come right on over to that particular microphone there. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. Second question. So if you would just go on over to that microphone so everyone can hear you, not only in here but on the internet. And just make your way on over there. And you can line up behind whoever goes first. You don't have to wait till the guy sits down because that'll just take too long. All right? All right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Chris. Can you hear me?
Hey, Chris, can hear you just fine. Go ahead,
Great.
sir.
I wanted to ask about your teleological argument. And so a theory has been presented about this idea of the multiverse, where
Yes.
there's, I'm sure you're familiar with,
Yes.
a lot of different universes. Mm-hmm. And the apparent fine-tuning of our universe is only because we can only perceive this universe. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, there is a lot of talk about a multiverse. So let's take a quick look at it because it's something that comes up and has come up in recent years. And really, the multiverse theory has only come up in recent decades because, from an atheistic perspective, there's no real way of explaining the fine-tuning of the universe unless you multiply the possibilities of getting this universe by chance without design. In other words, maybe there are other universes out there, and this universe just happens to be the one that has these parameters by chance, right? No design. And the only way to do that is to say, well, there's other universes out there. Here are a few of the problems with this theory. First of all, there's no evidence for it. It's purely speculative. We can't observe these other universes. We're just assuming they exist. Secondly, multiple universes, it seems to me, would multiply the need for a creator because each one would need creation to get started. And as Alexander Vilenkin, Board, and Guth found, even a multiverse needs an absolute beginning. In other words, some of the people who are the top in their field regarding cosmology, Vilenkin, Board, and Guth, they say you're going to get back to a beginner, whether it's a beginning of this universe or a beginning of other universes that exist too. So it seems to me, if there's an absolute beginning, there must be a beginner. Also, who or what is producing these universes and keeping them from colliding if they do exist? We might ask that question. And this multiplies its causes beyond necessity. Multiple universes versus one supernatural cause. There's a philosophy in science called Occam's razor, and that is you don't multiply causes beyond necessity. If one cause, a simple cause, can be the cause of the effect, then it makes more sense to go with that, one God versus all these other universes. And the last point is that this is an atheist admission of evidence for design, and that design is detectable. Nobody would be suggesting multiverses if the universe didn't appear to be designed, didn't appear to be fine-tuned. This is why even agnostic astronomers like Paul Davies at Arizona State University says the multiverse is a dodge. They're just trying to avoid the obvious implication that this universe appears to be so incredibly fine-tuned that there must be a fine-tuner out there. Make sense?
Thanks.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi,
Hey, what's your name?
Caleb.
Hey, Caleb, go ahead, sir.
All right, so it's a fairly simple question, but if the Christian God is believed to be a personal God who wants to have a relationship with people, wants people to turn to him, why does he leave so much room to doubt his existence? I think that this is an issue that most people struggle with to some extent or another.
Yeah, and it relates to what we call the hiddenness of God.
Yeah.
Right? Soren Kierkegaard, many years ago, was a Danish philosopher who had written a number of books, and he gave an illustration that I think makes a lot of sense. He says, imagine a prince in a given jurisdiction sees in his jurisdiction a beautiful young woman who is a peasant. And as soon as he sees her, he immediately falls in love with her. But he knows that if he goes to her as the prince, with his chariots, his guards, his horses, the trumpets, the whole deal, she may just fall for his power and not really love him. So he goes to his father, the king, and he says, I love this woman. I saw her from a distance, Father. How do I win her hand in marriage? And the father says, son, the only way you can know that she really loves you for who you are, and the only way she will know that she really loves you for who you are and not your position, is if you renounce the throne and you go to her as a peasant. So he does. He renounces the throne. He gives up his riches. He goes into her village dressed as a peasant, and he wins her as a peer. That's what God does for us. He adds humanity to his deity. He comes into this earth. He allows the people that rebelled against him to brutally torture and kill him so he can win their hand. If he were to come the first time with his chariots, his horns, his guards, all his power, he might overwhelm us, and we wouldn't have the ability to make a free choice. Mm-hmm. But since God comes the first time as a lamb to the slaughter, he gives us the ability to love him without overpowering us with his presence. Now, when he comes the second time, that's going to be the day of vengeance, the day of judgment, and that's when grace is going to be over. That's when, as C.S. Lewis said, when the author of the play walks on the stage, the play is over. And at some point, that's going to happen. We don't know when, but it will.
If I could ask a follow-up question
Sure.
to that, with I think Matt Dillahunty would talk about the fact that, or this idea that if God wants us to know him and knows each of us personally, wouldn't he know what it would take to convince me personally that he is real? And
No,
why?
because, yeah, but I think the reason is because some people don't want to be convinced. I think there's plenty of people out there who don't want God to exist. That's why I asked the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Absolutely.
And many atheists have been honest enough to say no. They don't want God to exist. So I don't think it's not just a matter of head knowledge. It's a heart commitment.
In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called?
James.
Thank you. He says even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. And this is, I didn't make this point in the presentation, I didn't have time, but there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is just intellectually knowing something is true. That's what we're doing here, apologetics, giving evidence for what you believe. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you've got to go from belief that to belief in.
Right.
And we know this in relationships. When I first met my wife 34 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. See? That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is of the head, but belief in is not just of the head, it's also of the heart. Mm-hmm. And so God is not going to force you to love him. He can't. That's a contradiction. All he can do is provide you with evidence and let you make up your own mind. But he's not going to overwhelm us with evidence. He's going to give us enough freedom to walk away. So I think there's enough evidence for you to know that Christianity is true. I also think God gives us enough freedom, enough distance for us to say, if I don't want God, I'm going my own way.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. It's like there's a secret door over there or something. People just come out of. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Matt.
Hey, Matt. You were there yesterday, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Oh,
yes.
How you doing? Go ahead.
I'll set soteriological disagreements aside tonight.
Okay.
I was just going to ask you, who's one person that you disagree with, maybe that you've learned the most from? Somebody that you just vehemently disagree with.
You mean outside of my wife?
Maybe somebody from.
Hi, honey.
Oh, jeez. Got you in trouble.
Yeah, thankfully it's like almost 1 a.m. in Charlotte, North Carolina. She ain't watching this. You mean like an atheist writer or something?
Yeah, just somebody that you disagree with that maybe has a completely opposite point of view than yours that kind of helped you, develop some of your ideas, or, that has really been maybe like a foil. You know what I mean? Those are sometimes good in our lives.
Oh,
right?
yeah. No, I think if you read a book like The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, philosophically, the book's a disaster. I'm just telling you, it's not a good book philosophically. But Dawkins is such a good writer that when you read Dawkins, you go, I can see how he could feel this way. I don't think he's right, but I can see how he could feel this way. Dawkins famously has that quote, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, pestilential. He goes on and on. And it's so good the way he puts it. The problem is, from his atheistic worldview, he's got no way of complaining about any God of the Bible or any other God because he's got no standard but his own opinion. And it's odd because on one hand, Dawkins thinks the God of the Bible is evil, and on the other hand, elsewhere he says there is no evil, there is no good, there's just blind, pitiless indifference, and we just dance to our DNA. Now look, you can't have it both ways. Either there is good and evil and God does exist, or there isn't and you can't complain about the God of the Bible.
Well, thank you for standing for the Christian worldview. Appreciate
Thanks,
that, sir.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Alan.
Hey, Alan.
I know the cross-exam has really helped me this past year, just with the Q&As and really defending Christianity as the Bible tells us to. Can you elaborate? I brought several of our teams from our church, and I wanted them to see, can you go over the differences between Christianity versus the other world religions such as Islam, Catholicism, Mormonism?
You mean in 2 minutes?
Yes.
That's like those are semester courses.
We'll try to.
He's like some kind of radio guy behind the glass going, shorten it up, shorten it up.
All right, why don't we just deal with Islam first, okay? Look, there are three great monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, okay? In my view, Christianity just completes Judaism. I think the Old Testament is true,
Right.
and I think the New Testament is true as well, so it completes Judaism. Islam comes along, well, first of all, Muhammad is born in 570 AD. In about 610 AD, he seems to think he gets a revelation from God to say that there's only one God. And he goes to Mecca in 622, and he tries to say, in a town that had a lot of idols, because people would go to Mecca and worship these deities, he tried to go in there and say, look, there's just one God. Allah is his name. And so they threw him out. He goes up to Medina, he begins to raid Meccan caravans, and in 630 he takes Mecca by force, but he doesn't have much resistance. He dies 2 years later, probably poisoned by somebody in 632. By 638, his followers have already taken over the Holy Land, and by 732, they've streamed across northern Africa, across the Straits of Gibraltar, into Spain, and were stopped in Tours, France, by Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, that's what his name means, Martel, and he pushed them back, and eventually the Muslims retreated back over the Straits of Gibraltar, and to this day, northern Africa is largely, predominantly Muslim. Now, Muhammad, when he was on the earth, never claimed to do miracles. In fact, in the Quran, he says, I'm just a plain warner, I don't do miracles.
Right.
Miracles are attributed to Muhammad about 150 years later in what's called the Hadith, the written traditions of what Muhammad said and did. These people were not eyewitnesses. As I say, it's about 150 years later. And some of the miracles appear to be modifications of Christian miracles, like Jesus turns water into wine, Muhammad turns water into milk. Jesus feeds 5,000, Muhammad feeds, 10 or 50,000, something like that, right? They appear to be kind of borrowed from Christianity, and even many Muslim scholars say they're legendary. So, I don't think there's any supernatural confirmation that Muhammad was a prophet, okay? And the miracles attributed to him were attributed much later. Now, there seems to me an eternal contradiction here for Muslims, because in Surah 568, which is a chapter in the Quran, the 68th verse, it says, O ye people of the book. Who are the people of the book? The Christians and the Jews.
Right.
You have no ground to stand on unless you stand on the law and the Gospels. In other words, the Quran is telling Christians and Jews they ought to obey the Old Testament and the New Testament. The problem is, if you obey the Old Testament and the New Testament, it contradicts with the Quran. Because in Surah 4, verse 157, it says that Jesus never died. He was taken straight to heaven, so he couldn't have resurrected from the dead, because God would never kill a prophet according to the Quran. Now keep in mind, Muhammad did not write the Quran. It was gathered after he died, and it was put together by the third Caliph Uthman in 650 AD. Okay? There's no miraculous confirmation that Muhammad was a prophet. So it's written 600 years after the events of Christianity. Why would we take a document written 600 years later to tell us what happened to Jesus when we have eyewitness testimony of what happened to Jesus?
Right.
So this is why I don't think Islam is the true world religion. Now, I'm not saying everything Islam teaches is false. That's not the case. I just think where it differs from Christianity, it's false. Mm-hmm. So that's the other great competitor to Christianity is Islam.
Right.
Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, most Muslims would agree with the first 3 points. Truth, God, miracles. Where they're going to have a problem with is the New Testament. So that's where Christians and Muslims separate with regard, one place they separate with regard to what happened to Jesus. All right?
Mm-hmm. And so I have one more as far as, can you elaborate more on the, or answer the question, I guess, of does God send us to hell?
Does God send us to hell? I had that question at a debate in Michigan. I was at University of Michigan. I was debating an atheist by the name of Eddie Tabash, who asked me this question during the debate. He was a Beverly Hills attorney. He said, Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived a life full of pain and suffering. Toward the end of her life, someone offered her the gospel, but she rejected it. Then she died. Is she in hell right now? It's a tough question to ask in front of a secular audience, right? So I said, well, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion or not. But if she didn't accept Christ before she died, then God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will.
Right.
You see, because the assumption is everybody wants to go to heaven. That is not true. Who's in heaven? Jesus is in heaven. Well, there have been people running from Jesus their entire lives. What's he going to do in the afterlife? Hey, where are you going? Get over here. You're with me now.
Right.
You go, wait, okay, I understand that Jesus isn't going to force people into his presence, but what's this business about hell? Well, I used an illustration with the University of Michigan audience that night, and I'll use it with you here. In fact, I asked the ladies this question. So, ladies, I'm going to ask you this question, okay? Ladies. Have you ever had a man pursue you whom you did not want to date? Some of you are going, yeah, and he's sitting next to me right now. He will not leave me alone. Whenever I ask that question, the ladies always giggle and the men look at their shoes. Is she looking at me right now? Well, ladies, suppose this doesn't deter this man. He keeps asking you out. And you finally had a little bit of enough of it. And you say, look, I like you, but only as a
Friend.
Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it? Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Gentlemen, I have some advice for you. If you ever hear the dreaded friend rejection, move on. She's not interested. In fact, I have some shocking news for you. She doesn't even like you as a friend. Ladies, I'm not lying, am I? See, if you were interested, you'd... If you really were interested, you wouldn't just say I like you as a friend. You'd be interested. But suppose this doesn't deter this guy. He continues to ask you out, and he finally says to you, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Ladies, run, screaming from the building. Can he force you to love him?
Nope.
No, love by definition must be freely given. So, ladies, if he truly did love you, what would he do? He would leave you alone. That's what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us Christ. He sends us the Bible. He sends us broadcasts. He may send us the Mosaic group here on campus. If you're a Muslim in a far-off land and you can't get the gospel, he may send you a dream or vision. That's very common right now. If God does all of that, and you keep saying, no, I don't want you, God will give you up to your own desires. He will leave you alone. In fact, Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 1. He says, if you suppress the truth long enough, God's going to give you up because he's a gentleman. He can't force you to love him.
Right.
All he can do is leave you alone.
Amen.
You say, well, what does it mean to be left alone? I mean, what's this business about hell? Well, look. Everybody, whether they're a Christian or not, receives some of the common grace of God. His rain falls on the just and the unjust, right? In other words, everybody experiences love, relationships, a future, a hope for a future. We experience all these things. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no love, there is no hope, there is no future, there are no relationships. There's just stone, cold, narcissistic self-absorption. That is Washington. No, and it's been that way for a long time, ladies and gentlemen. No, that is hell. You're cut off from the ultimate source of goodness, love, and justice by your own choice.
Right.
So God will leave you alone. In fact, C.S. Lewis famously put it this way. There's only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. So you're going to send yourself separated from God.
Right.
If you decide you don't want the free gift of forgiveness.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Hey, Dr. Frank.
Yes, sir. Is that Colton?
That is.
Hey, Colton.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. So just to piggyback off his question, so God's not going to force you into heaven if you don't want to go. But could somebody ever get out of hell?
Well, at some point, there's got to be a final destination. The writer of Hebrews says, it's appointed man wants to die, then the judgment. God knows whether somebody would ever be open to repentance. And if someone is open to repentance, I would think that God would extend that person's life until they did repent. Okay. But because he wants them to be saved more than we do. The scriptures say that God is love and he wants all people to be saved. But obviously all people are not saved. Why? Because some don't want to be saved. Some want to go their own way. So whatever happens in the afterlife, we know one thing. Since God is infinitely just and infinitely loving, that he's going to be just and loving at the same time. That nobody is going to, in the afterlife, go, you know, I really have been treated unfairly. Nobody's going to say that. Because God can't treat anybody unfairly, ultimately, because he's the standard of justice. Right. He's the standard of fairness.
That was going to be my second question. My second question was, if there is two possibilities of eternity with God and eternity separated, how is it just that God bases our entire eternity based off of this minute time we have on earth?
Okay, so why does God give a sort of infinite punishment for a finite crime, right? Well, think about it this way. There's a number of responses to that. One is the duration of the punishment doesn't always equal the duration of a crime. Like you could kill somebody in 2 seconds, but you don't serve a punishment for 2 seconds, right? You're going to serve a much longer punishment. Secondly, who's to say that you stop sinning when you're in hell? Maybe you continue to sin against God. Maybe you continue to weep and gnash your teeth at God because you don't want him. Notice in the famous story in Luke 16 of the rich man and Lazarus, remember the rich man is in Hades and Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom. And the rich man says, tell Lazarus to dip his finger in water and put it on my tongue because I'm in agony in this fire. Notice the rich man doesn't say, I shouldn't be here, let me out. He's still treating Lazarus like a servant. All he says is, go tell my brothers about this place. And what does Jesus say in this story? He says they have Moses and the prophets. If they don't believe them, they're not even going to believe if someone rises from the dead.
So what would you say to, okay, so he's in hell, and he obviously likes it because he's not trying to get out.
I didn't say he likes it, but he knows that's where he should be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right,
now, look, we don't know what God can do in the last moments of somebody's life, but we do know how people are saved by trusting in what Christ has done. So what we do is we risk all to get people that message, and then we leave the results to God.
Right.
We know that nobody in the afterlife is going to say, I got a raw deal, because God, by definition, is fair, just, right, loving, and so nobody's going to be treated unfairly. Everybody's going to be treated exactly like they should be treated.
All right.
All right?
All right.
Thanks, Colton.
Thanks.
Great question.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, Chris. Go ahead, sir.
Well,
By the way, Chris has a group here in Anchorage. He's just starting up. It's called Reasonable Faith. You guys know who William Lane Craig is? Okay, for those of you that don't know who William Lane Craig is, write down reasonablefaith.org. Reasonablefaith.org, because William Lane Craig is probably the top Christian debater over the past 35 or so years. He's probably debated more than 100 people. Mm-hmm. And he also has an app as well, reasonablefaith.org. He has a podcast every week like we do. He's somebody you ought to be listening to. And locally, Chris runs this Reasonable Faith chapter. Chris, tell them where that is and how they can get involved if they want.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's at Reasonable Faith Anchorage, if you look online on Facebook. And we meet every second Tuesday of the month at 12100, a coffee shop down off of Old Seward. But if you find us on Facebook, we post regularly Dr. Frank Turek, Dr. Craig, things for youth. And if it's a place, if you have questions like what you're asking today or what you're thinking about, if you have questions about quantum foam and Nietzsche and Dr. Craig, will prove what the color red tastes like or something silly. But all those hard questions that you're asking, that's a place for you to come ask. And you can email me directly and we'll work to get an answer.
What time do you guys meet? Second Tuesday of every month?
Second Tuesday of every month, second Thursday of every month.
Second Thursday.
That's right, 6:30 to 8:30.
At where?
At 12100. It's a coffee shop,
12100
12100 Coffee in Communitas off of Old Seward.
Yeah,
And
so if you want to go deeper into this evidence stuff, there's probably nobody deeper at a popular level and scholarly level than Bill Craig. So he's the guy you got to get to know.
And we'll get you answers. I'll work with Mosaic and your ministry and try to get the word out. So Reasonable Faith Anchorage. You can find us on Facebook. This is a softball question.
Yes, sir.
If somebody's leaving here and you've put a kernel in their shoe and they want to look further into the Christian faith, what are the first 3 books they should read?
Oh, other than the Bible.
Other than the Bible.
Okay.
Concurrent with.
Yeah, personally, I would read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. If you haven't read Mere Christianity yet, then consider yourself undereducated. And it's not a hard book to read. In fact, you can probably even download the audio for free online. I think I think it's up there, and it's well worth listening to. There was nobody like C.S. Lewis who could put things at a level that anybody could understand. These analogies he had were just fabulous. So I would recommend anything by C.S. Lewis, particularly Mere Christianity. Other than my own books, I would certainly recommend anything by Lee Strobel, because Lee Strobel does books that are accessible to anybody, and he interviews the best scholars in the field on this. I would also recommend the books by my friend J. Warner Wallace. One's called Cold Case Christianity, the guy I mentioned earlier, which is a great book, and God's Crime Scene. Those are all really good books from an apologetics perspective. Okay, apologetics perspective.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. And also Bill Craig's book, William Lane Craig, called On Guard. On Guard is a great book as well. Yes, sir, go ahead. What's your name?
Tyrese.
Tyrese?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
So what happens to the people who live like in villages in other countries that never heard about God or Jesus or any of that? What happens to them?
Excellent question. What about those that have never heard? Now, notice that the question, what about those that have never heard, is actually a moral question. If you think about it, why is it a moral question? Because we're saying that it seems unfair of God to provide his revelation just to some people and not others, that almost God's immoral, that he's going to let some people go to hell who would have gone to heaven if they had only known, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good question. First of all, let's say this. Christ's sacrifice is necessary for salvation. Why is Jesus the only way? Because he's the only way that infinite justice and infinite love can come together without God being unjust. In other words, God still punishes sin. He just doesn't punish the sinner. He punishes himself in our place. And since he's an infinite being, he has to punish sin. If he doesn't punish sin, he's not just. So Christ's sacrifice is necessary for salvation. Now, everyone knows God exists, nature and conscience. This is called natural revelation. God has written 2 books, nature and the Bible. And everybody has nature. Everybody knows there's got to be a creator and there's got to be a moral creator out there, because God has revealed the effect of creation on us and the effect of our conscience. So everybody knows there's a God. There's actually nobody out there who's never heard of God. They may not have heard of Jesus, but they've heard of God. Secondly, some say that those who don't know Jesus can be saved by Christ's sacrifice if they seek God. Like the Old Testament saints didn't know Jesus' name. He hadn't come yet, right? But they were still saved by the sacrifice of Jesus, even though he hadn't in time come yet. So they didn't know his name. However, I think the more biblically consistent view is that God will get true seekers the truth about Christ so they can be saved. An example of this is in Acts chapter 10, where Cornelius is a God-fearer, but he doesn't know who Jesus is. So God sends a prophet over there to tell him who Jesus is in order for him to get saved. Now, is it possible he could have been saved without knowing Jesus? Oh, it's theoretically possible, sure. But it seems like the New Testament tells you need to know the name of Jesus. So you say, what about those who don't know the name of Jesus? It could be that God has so ordered the world so that those who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. In other words, we know people who hear the gospel and don't believe it, right? It could be that those who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. And this is what Paul seems to hint at when he's talking to the Athenians on Mars Hill. What does he say? He said that from one man God made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. It seems like God has so preordained the universe that people live in places where they will hear the gospel if they're truly seeking. It might be that people who live in areas that don't get the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. Now, I don't even know if that's 100% true. That's just a possibility. But it's one way of solving the issue. As I said earlier, we know for sure that since God wants all people to be saved, he is going to do everything he can to get people saved because he wants them to be saved more than we do. And nobody's going to be treated wrongly in the afterlife. As I said, what we do know for sure how people are saved. That's why we risk all to get them the gospel. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, we got time for one more. All right. Or whoever's back there. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I was wondering, I know somebody who doesn't want to become a Christian because they want to do whatever they want.
Sure.
How do I respond to that?
That's a really good question. They admit they don't want to become a Christian?
Yes, because they just want to do whatever they want. And they said that if I become a Christian, then I have to follow a set of rules, and that she just wants to do whatever she wants.
Well, at least she's honest. You know where she's coming from, right? I would say with that person, you would just commend them on honesty, and then just do whatever you can to love them. And continue maybe to plant seeds about truth in that person's life. And I can almost guarantee that something's going to happen in the future. Not totally, but I can almost guarantee it. Something's going to happen in that person's life that's going to be difficult. And your phone is going to ring and they're going to be on the other end. Because who are they going to call when difficulty arises? They're not going to call their atheist friends. What are their atheist friends going to say? Oh, there's no rhyme or reason to any of this. There is no meaning to life. We just dance to our DNA. No. Yeah. They're going to call you because you're a person of spiritual depth. And at that point, then they might be open to the gospel. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So just love the person and plant seeds here or there. And then at some point, if something happens, they may call you. But look, you can't bring everybody to Christ. You can only bring Christ to everyone.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. Look, if God could force people to believe, then everybody would be a believer. But he can't do that if he's going to give us free will and allow us to truly love him or reject him. Why isn't everybody saved? Because some people don't want God. They want to do their own thing. And if Christians, if we're honest with ourselves, there's sometimes we want to do our own thing too, don't we?
Yeah.
Right? This just doesn't affect unbelievers. It affects us. It's inconvenient to be a Christian. I'd rather smack that guy upside his head. Wouldn't you? I'd rather do what I want to do rather than what God wants me to do. I know over long term, it's best for me to follow what God wants me to do, though. Even over the short term, it might be difficult, right? So I appreciate your concern for your friend. I can tell it's bugging you.
Yeah.
So just love the person as best you can and just be there. And at some point, you might have an opportunity. All right? Thank you. All right. All right, friends. Sorry, we got to go. We got to leave the room because it's getting late. But thank you so much. Thanks to the folks out there. And we'll see you next time.